EC3 and The Revolt forming a faction? Tom Segura actually loves wrestling, and who was supposed to end The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak? We talk about that in our pro wrestling news and rumors roundup here on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti. For news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. So, Ralph, midway in the week, we saw that EC3 had a very interesting video come out where he was actually promoting not himself, but The Revolt. Cash Wheeler and Dax Harwood, formerly known as The Revival, Scott Dawson and Dash Wilder. So people are going to start speculating and get those rumors circulating, Ralph. So are we going to see a faction at some point in wrestling with The Revolt and EC3?
Well, I certainly would hope that something like that would happen, especially considering the circumstances of why and how these people ended up leaving the WWE. Even though the Revolt or the Revival, whichever you want to refer to them as, had their moments in WWE, I think most people would agree that they were mostly underutilized, didn't necessarily get the opportunities that a lot of people thought they should have gotten. A lot of people feel like they didn't necessarily get the recognition they should have gotten.
Right.
EC3 is one of those people that you can probably lump into that as well, because I think that if you look at his career as to this point, his best run in professional wrestling at the mainstream level is probably his time in Impact Wrestling.
Yep.
Going to NXT or going through NXT for a short stint, working his way up to the main card. I think a lot of people thought that he was going to be one of those guys that transitioned really well to the upper mid card and then eventually work his way to the top of the card, much like the Revolt. Definitely a different look for EC3 that he's trying to put out there right now. I don't think that we're going to get a very different look or tone from the Revolt, regardless of where they go. I think that if they go to AEW, which is the likely landing spot for these individuals, I think that it would work well if they came in as a group, very similar to how the Radicals came into WWF or WWE back in the day, if you remember that. The reason I say that is I think that a good majority or a majority of the AEW fan base is going to know who these individuals are. Right. It's not 100% guaranteed. Even back when wrestling was as big and as popular as it was, as many as the millions of people were watching Nitro back then, not everybody was 100% aware of who the Radicals were, every individual.
Especially those that only watched Raw.
Right. You probably had an idea of who they were and you probably heard of them, but you really didn't truly understand who they were. If they come in as a group, especially a dominant faction or somebody that's supposed to be a dominant faction, whether they go up against the Inner Circle or whoever, the Nightmare Collective or whoever it may be, I think that would be a smart move because they wouldn't necessarily have to be promoting each individual person or the tag team in EC3. Here's the group. Let them get over as the group, then separate them and let them do their own thing, very much like the Radicals did back when they were in WWF.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now that you bring up the Radicals, that's a great idea, and I love it. We know the Revival are a great tag team, but how are they on the mic? The way that EC3 has been putting out these videos, he has been doing very well with this new character that he's trying to create. He's trying to break away from the top 1% character because basically it's like MJF. And if he's going to AEW, you don't want to have two very like characters. So he's trying to break away from that. And maybe he could do that and have the Revolt. And their characters kind of help each other out, I think. So I think it would be a great idea to have this faction no matter where they end up. And like you said, if it is like the Radicals, they do end up splitting up and go their way and succeed. I know, Eddie Guerrero had a good career. Chris Benoit, when he was wrestling, ended up main eventing WrestleMania at one point. So it could work. And EC3 might end up breaking out as a single star, and the Revolt could end up breaking out as the top tag team in AEW or whatever promotion they end up in. So I think it could work. And I'm sure people in the comment section are definitely going to at least talk about it, whether they agree or disagree if they should form the faction or not. And of course, part of EC3's videos also include Rockstar Spud, aka Drake Maverick, who's currently doing the Cruiserweight tournament for the Cruiserweight Interim Championship. His contract, probably going to end soon as he was one of the released. So do you see him getting involved in this faction as well?
Yeah, I definitely could. And again, I'm also assuming that the likely landing spot for them would be AEW. It could also be Ring of Honor. It could be NWA. You really don't know where they're going to go. But AEW, I think, is where they'd make their biggest impression, especially considering, the revival, the revolt, whatever you want to call them. These guys are fairly well known. The other thing that you also have to consider incorporating Rockstar Spud. We know that they do have some smaller wrestlers. So, seeing him go up against guys like a Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, off the top of my head, those would be two matches that I'd love to see. And the other thing you also have to remember in respect to EC3, there was a guy who had a win over Moxley right before he left WWE. So does that play a part in it, knowing that Moxley, as of right now, is the champion? EC3, after his little hiatus, he came back. He did have that victory over Moxley or Ambrose back then.
Yeah.
And I think Ambrose got the win back the following week just because that's the WWE style with the 50-50 booking off the
Right.
top of my head. So that can be incorporated into the storyline. So there's a lot of intriguing things they can do with this group and introduce them where they're really in a prominent role right from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, if they're going to put Brody Lee in the AEW championship match after what, 4 matches, why can't they put EC3 in that spot as well? If he ends up in AEW, I know the 90-day clause for him expires in what, August, I would say, or mid-July. So it's going to be a while anyway, but I think that's a great idea if you put him right into the mix with Moxley. And maybe even Moxley doesn't have the title anymore if Brody Lee ends up taking it from him. So,
right.
that would be a very good first feud, I think, for EC3. Unfortunately, if it's where Moxley still has the title, does EC3 win that feud and take the title from Moxley, or do they have him lose his first feud against Moxley as Moxley retains? We'll see if that happens, and when it happens, how it will play out. But let's move on to a little bit of controversy that broke out in social media thanks to Ryan Satin, who posted out a video from the Your Mama's podcast or Your Mama's House podcast featuring Tom Segura, a comedian, who basically called wrestling fans effing retards. And of course, that circulated all over. A lot of people talking about this, including Broken Matt Hardy of AEW, saying Tom Segura, who insulted pro wrestling and its fans, is looking for an emotional rise as a comedian. Don't bite his barb bait, expired long ago and made him seem uncultured. Does he criticize the concept of Santa next? My advice, ignore him. We know what wrestling is, and it's awesome. And then also Dolph Ziggler had something to say about it too, saying, I'm extremely proud of the incredible work wrestlers continue to put in every day, and I'm pleased with our product, usually. I will assume this a comedic take for someone having fun. If not, I'm always willing to discuss the professional wrestling business at length, anytime and any place. Now, this is coming from Dolph Ziggler, who is a wrestler trying to dab into the comedian world. He's done some stand-up comedy in the past, but Tom Segura actually responded to this by putting another clip from the podcast where he said, of course I understand why people like wrestling. It's awesome. Those guys are real athletes. Maybe it's stunts try that. You get hurt. Those guys are the real deal. The drama involved, you could follow anything. It's like a show. It's like a effing soap opera for men. I think it's great. I love effing wrestling. And then someone else cut out a video that was posted in response where Tom Segura says, cut that out, put that out. I've heard some effing morons say that, so I just parroted it. We get it. Wrestling's predetermined, Ralph. I mean, we just saw a very, very good episode of Dark Side of the Ring not too long ago where it was Dr. D. David Schultz slapping John Stossel, the slap heard around the world, where he tried to criticize wrestling for being fake. And, basically Dr. D got blackballed for slapping the news journalists. It's not new what Tom Segura is saying. And there's going to be people like Tom Segura that just say this stupid things like, oh, wrestling's fake. We know it's fake or predetermined, but we watch it anyway. Do you go into an action movie and say it's fake? No, you watch it because you like it.
Yeah. Look, I mean, and I think especially now that social media is so prominent where a clip, a 20-second clip, a 5-second clip, a 10-second clip can go around and be seen by millions of people. People are going to say outlandish things like this. He's not the first one to do it, not just about professional wrestling, and he won't be the last one to do it, I'm sure.
Right.
I mean, if you look at just professional wrestling, people lose their minds over some of the stuff that is said by people on Twitter, on YouTube, when they're reviewing pay-per-views or Dynamite or whatever the show may be. So controversy, as Eric Bischoff once said, creates cash. Did I know who this guy was before he made these comments? No, but you know what? Now he's gaining some type of exposure, whether that's good or bad, but he's getting his name out there. He knows what he's doing, just like Matt Hardy said. Now, on the other side of that, the way he said it, very much like the way some people feel like Ronda Rousey made these comments, it can certainly come across as insulting to fans and especially the workers. You know, us as fans, especially in professional wrestling, when you say certain things, we know that you're going to get an emotional reaction. I mean, just look at the type of reaction you get as a diehard WWE fan in comparison to a diehard AEW fan. There's certainly a divide there. So if me as a WWE fan or me as an AEW fan, if I say something negative about the other product, you know you're going to get a reaction. It's usually an emotional reaction. So when you go down the rabbit hole of this is fake, this isn't a real sport, this and that, you're going to get a reaction. That being said, he does have his opinion. But like you pointed out, if you say it to the wrong person or if you use the wrong tone, then, you know, if he comes across a guy like a Brock Lesnar or Wardlow, or I mean, look at what David Schultz did. If you say that to the wrong person and you make comments about an industry that people make their livelihood off in, it might not have such a good outcome if you cross the wrong person. So, you know, he's entitled to his opinion. Not everybody likes every sport. Not everybody likes every profession, and he can say what he wants about it. But, you know, there's a lot of big bad guys in professional wrestling, and he may want to watch what he says in case he comes across one of them, because you never know how they're going to handle it, whether it's on Twitter, but if it's in person, might be a different story.
I haven't seen it yet, but I want to see the reaction of Jim Cornette when he first sees this or hears about this, or he talks about it on the podcast. He's going to be like, well, no wonder why he says it's fake. You got the Invisible Man, you got Orange Cassidy, my dog Pockets, you know, Kenny Omega with his jazz hands. He'll find a way to just bash on professional wrestling today and use Tom Segura as a way to be like, well, this is why you have to protect the business. You know, it's funny. So I saw the video numerous times. I do believe that he was, while he's not a wrestling fan, he was trying to be funny. And I've seen his comedy specials. He's not funny. He's boring. He's put me to sleep. And I've seen a lot of comedy specials. He's not funny. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
like I said, I had no idea who the hell he was. So
yeah.
he's talking down to a fan base that is very passionate about the product that they watch. And he knows he's going to get this type of reaction. So he's getting attention. He's getting what he wants. I think the best thing any of us can do as fans, don't react to it. Right. Don't follow him on Twitter. Don't tweet at him. Nothing. It's not, I mean, it's kind of a waste to even talk about him right now because he's getting exactly what he wants out of that, and that is attention.
Right.
Fortunately for us as wrestling fans, like you pointed out, he probably sucks at what he does because I didn't know who the hell he was.
Yep.
If he's going to talk badly about an industry that I enjoy, then I might as well talk poorly about him. He's not that funny.
Yeah.
I don't need to watch his shit to know that, I guess, because I don't know who the hell he is.
Yeah, he's not exactly Richard Pryor or George Carlin when it comes to comedy greats. So, but
he's not even a Mick Foley.
No, he's not a Mick Foley. And I've actually seen Mick Foley's comedy show live. It was funny for like 2 hours. I was laughing the entire time. So, actually on this podcast, and we're talking about the whole wrestling thing, his wife and co-host mentioned how she went on a date with someone at a wrestling show, and his favorite wrestler was The Undertaker, which is our last bit of news that we're going to talk about here. The Undertaker and the streak. Now, we all know WrestleMania 30 was where it ended. Brock Lesnar ended the streak. A lot of people still to this day say that wasn't the right move. However, Michelle McCool says that was not the original plan. In fact, the streak was supposed to end 6 years prior when Edge was supposed to be him at WrestleMania 24, but Edge said no and said it made no sense. So I'll ask you, Ralph. I know Edge already said it made no sense. Do you agree to this day, 6 years later, the Undertaker streak should have ended with Brock Lesnar, or Do you think it should have gone to Edge, or do you think it should have gone to someone else?
Well, I definitely think that it should have remained intact and that the Undertaker should have beaten Edge. I remember going into that match, watching it, and actually believing or thinking that Edge was going to be the individual to end the streak. That didn't end up happening, but that is what it is. Do I think Brock Lesnar was the right individual to go over him? I can certainly tell you that Paul Heyman and Brock Lesnar have made a living and a career off him ending the streak.
Yep.
At that time, could there have been anybody else who had beaten him to end the streak? That I think the one thing that I take away from this is if you go back and look at the streak itself, after he beat Edge was really when the streak started to take on a whole new life in itself. It's like, he did have an undefeated streak into that point, but then when you look at the tail end of the streak, you've got his 2 matches against Shawn Michaels, which we know were very important to the end of the career of Shawn Michaels. It ultimately was the end of his career. And not only that, but they were 2 of the best matches in professional wrestling history, especially the first one. So you have to take that into consideration. After that, he had his feud with Triple H, which if you go back and watch those matches, were probably some of the best matches in WrestleMania history. Probably for certain, in my opinion, some of Triple H's best matches, maybe off the top of my head. So you have that.
Yep.
And then you have to consider that the build into his match with CM Punk was also very good. And the match itself was very good. I was actually there for that one.
Right.
So had those things occurred without the streak remaining intact, I think they would certainly lose that big fight feel, that big WrestleMania moment feel, especially when you consider the feud with Shawn Michaels. So while I think Edge was very hot at the time, if you look at the matches he had after that, would it have done something for his career? Of course it would have, because he would have ended the streak. But ultimately, he was hurt. He was injured. He knew he was on borrowed time. I'm not sure if that was around the time where he knew he wasn't going to be able to wrestle for how many years after that. But I think it was the right call not having Edge go over The Undertaker at that time.
Yeah, I agree. Edge probably wasn't the right guy. I think a lot of people that make the argument, if not Brock, I think the argument is CM Punk, and that's part of the reason why CM Punk left WWE. As a lot of people, I know from what I understand, if I remember correctly, CM Punk also said that he did not want to end the streak, but made sense more at the time when CM Punk was facing The Undertaker, because CM Punk was on the rise and could have been the top star at that point, and beating The Undertaker and breaking the streak would have helped. I think what really was the issue was the fact that Undertaker continued after the streak ended with Brock Lesnar. Like, if Brock Lesnar beat him, that should have been how Undertaker left his career and ended his career, because I always believe you leave with your shoulders on the mat. And all the matches that he's had after that moment, there hasn't been a good match from The Undertaker. I mean, there's the Boneyard match, but that wasn't really a match. That was an action film fight scene, really, when you think about it. But Bray Wyatt match didn't really deliver. The Roman Reigns match, even The Undertaker admitted that he was disappointed in the outcome of that match. The John Cena match was a great build that ended in a 4-minute squash. The Goldberg match was a disaster. So I think Lesnar, I know a lot of people might hate me in the comments for this, but I think Lesnar was the right guy, and it shows in hindsight it was the right guy. I just think his streak should have ended also with his career.
There's nobody with more real life credentials than Brock Lesnar in professional wrestling, in my opinion. Maybe in the history of professional wrestling, other than maybe Kurt Angle, gold medalist. There's other guys like Ken Shamrock. I mean, when you're trying to convince people, like we just talked about, that this is a real sport or a real confrontation amongst people, especially when you take into consideration the whole streak and the mystique behind that. I know a lot of people are divided on this. I know a lot of people don't like Brock Lesnar because of where he where he was, how he was the champion, and how people feel like he held the championship for too long and took Raw and for hostage, more or less, and held the title for far too long. But there's nobody that has more more credentials, that's going to feel more realistic to beat The Undertaker and end the streak. And they created that shocking moment. You could have looked at it and said it could have been this guy, it could have been that guy, but we're how many years past that point, and Paul Heyman can still go out there, say what he says, get heat from the fans once we're allowed to have crowds there again.
Right.
And it's going to work. CM Punk could have been the guy, but ultimately he ended up leaving the WWE. If there was a guy that I was going to look at from the list of guys that, he had beaten before the Brock Lesnar match, I would have picked Punk, but
you mean you wouldn't pick Giant Gonzalez?
I'm talking about between losing or the streak ending and the Edge match.
Yeah, but all right. So let us know in the comments what you guys think of the streak ending with Edge instead of Brock Lesnar. What you think of Tom Segura, whether you think he's funny or if you think his comments were stupid. Or let us know what you think of EC3 and the Revolt as a faction in wrestling. Don't forget to share us all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPV Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti. Thank you for watching Squared Circle Psycho Battle.